I have your book here. May Allah reward you. And on page 88, essentially, you address David Hume's contention on causality. The one that's like goes as causality only makes sense within the universe. Therefore, the universe may have come from nothing. So you address this pretty well, and I'm pretty satisfied with what you say. But then there was a debate between Muhammad Hijab and Edward Tabash a few years ago, and in the debate, the does God exist? Muhammad heavily relies on the contingency argument, and this is because he says that when it comes to causality, um, there's this fallacy of composition. Like, for example, if you have a wall, he essentially is admit succumbing to David Hume's contention, right? So he doesn't provide an answer like you did, but he just says, "Yeah, we have this problem with causality. That's why I rely on the contingency and not cosmological arguments." Right? So
Yeah, I think yes, sorry. I think, well, the fallacy of composition is also applied to the contingency argument. So I think maybe Muhammad Hijab, I don't know if you understood him properly. I haven't seen that debate in full. But if he did say that, that wouldn't be 100% accurate. But I don't think he meant that. So the fallacy of composition is what you call an applied fallacy. It's not a universal fallacy, so it doesn't apply all the time. And it basically says that it's fallacious for you to say that the whole shares the same properties as the individual parts, or an individual part that makes up the whole. And they give an example. For example, say an example is a Persian rug. The Persian rug is heavy, right? Now it would be fallacious to say just because the Persian rug is heavy, the individual thread is also heavy that makes up the Persian rug. We agree that's a fallacy of composition. However, it's not always applied. It can be the case that the whole shares the same property as the individual parts. Take a brick wall. A brick wall is hard, and the individual brick is also hard, correct? So they apply this to the contingency argument. They say, how can you say the universe is contingent just because it's made up of contingent things? They say it's fallacious to say that the universe is contingent, the whole is contingent, because its individual parts are also contingent. They say this is the fallacy of composition, but they've misunderstood the fallacy. Why? Because of the principle of contingency, or you could call it the principle of dependency. Contingent parts always make up contingent wholes. Always. This, and for them to go against this, they require some proof. Yeah, of course.
So the fallacy of composition applies to relative qualities. So things that are relative, you can say, well, like for example, if I say that's a really big egg, there could be an elephant, a fully grown elephant, that's bigger than that egg, but I would call it small. And so, if you've got a number of things, you can't say, well, that egg's small, that egg's small, that egg's small, so this pile of eggs is also going to be small. The fallacy of composition doesn't apply here, because the quality you're trying to transfer from the part to the whole is a relative one. It depends on perspective and things like that, and what it is you're referring to, etc. Then you have non-relative qualities. So Brother Hamza, he gave the great example of the brick. If a brick is hard, then you can safely apply the quality of hardness to the wall, even though it's a part being, and you're saying that, well, this part is a hard brick, it's rough, or it's made of stone or whatever. If it's true of the part, because it's not a relative quality, you can also say that this is also true of the whole. And I would also then argue that this would be the case then for contingency or for dependency. Dependency isn't a relative quality. If a part is dependent or contingent, you can say this about the whole, because this idea of contingency, this idea of dependency, is not a relative quality. That's the major distinction, because it begs the question: well, what is it when you say that there's something that's the fallacy of composition here? Well, what is it that makes the fallacy of composition apply to one thing and not to another? It's the quality of whether or not that quality is relative. Sorry.
Yes, another professor talks about the principle of dependency or contingency, that contingent things always make up contingent wholes. And for them to go against that, then they have to try and prove that, which is an absolute impossibility. So that's the kind of fallacy applied to the contingency argument. So I don't see that the contingency argument is free from that accusation. You could still accuse it of being fallacious, but you could just respond in the way that we just said. And when you, so if what you're saying that Muhammad Hijab actually said that the causality type of argument suffers from that, well, it doesn't, because again, you'll have to assume that David Hume is right. You'll have to assume that causality is a posteriori, that you derive it from experience. But you don't. And the argument that I've mentioned in the book is an argument to show that you need some understanding of causal relations in order to understand your experiences. If you don't have understanding of causal relations, you can't understand any of your experience. And I gave the kind of Kantian argument of there is a scenario where you can order your perceptions and reorder your perceptions, and there is another scenario where you can't order your perceptions and you can't reorder them. So what is it in one's mind, or what concept exists for you to apply to understand the distinction between those two different scenarios? It's actually the understanding of causality or causal relations. If you didn't have that, you wouldn't be able to understand any of your experiences at all. So again, someone could make the argument, but you could respond. Maybe if what you're saying, Hijab, what he was saying was right, or what you're saying about what he said, he actually said it. Maybe he wasn't aware of responding to this type of David Hume argument, which is to show that actually causality is a priori and you need it in order to understand your experiences in the first place. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, in the debate, he was actually saying that it was an argument presented by Bertrand Russell, where it was like kind of the analogy you gave of a wall. If a wall is built with like small parts, it doesn't mean that the entire wall is small. But at the same time, if a wall is built up of small red parts, it could be that the entire wall is red. So he says that both atheists and theists are at a stalemate when it comes to cosmological arguments, but that's why he's relying on the contingency argument.
Yeah, if he did say that, I think that's slightly mistaken, because there is no stalemate. It's a misapplication of the fallacy, as Yusuf Ponder's also articulated. And not only that, when you're saying, we see cause and effect within the universe, so it would be silly to now claim that the whole universe can be affected by a cause. That's what they're basically saying. Yeah, that's a ridiculous argument, because it's not even forget the fallacy. It's a ridiculous argument based upon the fact that they're assuming that causality is only derived from experience. It's only derived from stuff within the universe. But if you could show that causality is a priori, is prior to experience from that perspective, and you need it to understand your experiences, then the argument fails from that perspective, Okay. And remember, you need to understand the concept of causality. Although in Western metaphysics, they haven't understood what is the nature of the causal link. And what I mean by that, when you study metaphysics and philosophy, you see that there's massive debates on what is the nature of the causal link. There's lots of ikhtilaf, man. Yeah. So for them to even use this as an argument in some kind of defeater, say, well, ask them what kind of type of causality are you talking about? Yeah. Anyway,
can I jump in? Can I jump? So it always perturbs me a bit as well, because like when you're talking to people and they're trying to sort of bat aside this idea of causality, often the case, it's obviously atheists that are doing this, people that believe, that lack the belief in God. And they'll often say, well, you're using a very small sample base. You've only experienced X amount percentage of the whole universe. How can you say that this is the case for the whole thing? And so, well, this is what the scientific endeavor is constantly doing. Even with, like, you think in terms of the studies in quantum physics, how many atoms, what percent of atoms have we done experiments with compared to the amount of atoms in the universe? But do we then hold them to the same standard here? Do we say, hold on a second, you've only studied 0.0000 whatever percent of atoms in the universe. How can you make these inferences? Or, with anything like it in the scientific endeavor, we are justified in making particular inferences. And if anything, the whole endeavor of the scientific enterprise is underpinned by notions of causality to some degree. They may be starting to argue now that causality may be counterintuitive in some way, but that doesn't negate causality altogether. Yes. And not only that, causality is probably one of the things we have the most empirical evidence for. Like everything that we've experienced seems to have some sort of cause. That whenever you have a cause, there's always effects. When you have effects, there seems to be causes. There is more data to suggest the existence of cause and effect than anything else. And simply pointing out that there are some cases where it might be counterintuitive, or there might be a gap in our knowledge in terms of how certain effects come into being because we can't find their causes. This isn't enough to negate the data that we have to suggest that cause and effect is a thing.
Yes. But again, that would assume, bro, as well, that to go down that line of reasoning, that would assume that actually causality is something that you derive from your own experiences. Take it to the next level, take it to a metaphysical level. You can't have an understanding of your experiences without a conceptualization of causality in some way.
Yeah, I agree with you. The only reason I mention that is just to put them on the back foot, because they're coming with these critiques, but a lot of the time they're undermining their own position with
and
these.
Yusuf, you know what it is? A lot of these atheists, kufr, the rejection of truth always contradicts itself. Like even, for example, the notion when even maybe Richard Dawkins or Krauss will say universe comes from nothing, and then they'll try and popularize it and say it means absolutely nothing. Yeah, although we know they don't mean that, but say some do. Think about that notion. Just think about it for a moment. Is that consistent with reality, your reality, at every domain of knowledge that you hold? And this is why you need to expose these inconsistencies. If something can come from nothing, if being can come from non-being, then you could walk past the supermarket, close your eyes. After you open your eyes, the supermarket has disappeared. And you should not be surprised by that. You should think there should be perfectly no reason or no cause for why it disappeared. Similarly, Richard Dawkins could call his bank manager to find out how many millions he has from selling his fiction books. And he could basically ask his bank manager, how much money have I got? And he could say, you have nothing now. If he's consistent with the idea, if he holds the idea to be true, he should say, that's a perfectly fine explanation. Yeah, it just happened. This is why you need to also find out what the underlying logic of their particular argument is and apply it to every other sphere of knowledge in their life, right? And this is something very, very important because it gives you the tools to show massive inconsistencies in the worldview. And an interesting one that Yusuf just made is, well, if they say, you got limited experience in the universe for causality, it could be the case that causality doesn't exist or it doesn't apply outside or even elsewhere within the universe. And Yusuf is saying, hold on a second, isn't the scientific method based on induction? That you have a limited set of observations and you conclude for the unknown or for the next observation or for the entire set of observations. Even evolution, for example, we haven't seen all of biological change. We haven't seen the mechanism in action on all biological change. We haven't even explored about 90% of the ocean. Yeah. So again, see what Yusuf was doing there? He was showing a contradiction and inconsistency with the approach, because kufr, and I always say this in the courses, the rejection of truth will always contradict itself. So just apply what they say to everything else. But anyway, I hope that helps, bro.
Yeah. So just to make it clear, is the cosmological argument, can it still be backed up by your argument in the book the same way you backed up the contingency argument?
Yes. So the response to Hume was in the Quranic argument for God's existence. So when they say, the universe could potentially come from nothing because causality may not exist outside of the universe, and if causality doesn't exist outside of the universe, then we don't need to say how did the universe come into being, because that wouldn't make any sense. And you could just address it the way that we've just done by basically saying that, talking about the metaphysical issue, you need causality that's a priori. This question assumes that causality is derived from your experience, but actually it's the other way around. You need an understanding of some basic form of causality or causal relations in order to understand any of your experiences. So this question itself is quite self-defeating. That's the point.
Okay, thank you very much, guys. May Allah reward you guys. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
So, brothers and sisters, don't forget why we're here. We're here to answer your questions, to engage with you, and we're also here for you to ask for your support. Go to the description, click on the link, go to sapienseinstitute.org/donate live. What you just heard now is like a small part of what we do. What we do usually is that on steroids, if you like. When we have the one-to-one mentoring on a lighthouse mentoring, when we're developing du'a, answering people's questions and so on and so forth, and which we've been inundated, by the way, into July or August even. We train and develop people. We trained this year 6,000. What I mean by this year, since our inception in last year, May, practically it was July when we started the training, over 6,000 Muslims to articulate a positive message for Islam, articulate Islam intellectually and academically. We produced over 33 academic webinars. We published 3 books. We produced 30 sapient thought videos and so much more. What we want to do after Ramadan is develop a book on doubts, do a website on doubts, dealing with the shubuhat that you find online and offline. We want to write a book on science and religion. We want to train at least 10 to 15,000 people, brothers and sisters, to be able to share Islam academically and intellectually, leaders spawning other leaders. We want to translate academic books that exist in Arabic by intellectuals. We have the rights to 2 amazing books concerning the proofs of Islam, and we have the rights to translate those books into the English language. So much stuff we want to do, training, development, videos, and so on and so forth. This requires your support, especially the Lighthouse. It requires, we want to expand it, that's why, because it's such an unprecedented, overwhelming request. And people, have booked things into July or even beyond, and someone was asking, I can't wait that long. So we need your support, brothers and sisters. Donate generously. The month of Ramadan is a month of sadaqah. Sadaqah is a proof of your iman. The Prophet said, sadaqah does not diminish wealth. You will have no excuse. Go to sapienseinstitute.org /donate live, or click the description below.